In late 2019, a gray 3-year-old colt named Nix Go stood in a stall at Churchill Downs with a record that made him nearly worthless as a racehorse. He had won one race in his career and lost his last 10 in a row. He had gone winless in all 8 of his starts as a 3-year-old, a season where he was supposed to be building toward the Kentucky Derby, and instead he had run 5th, 7th, 4th, 5th, and 2nd, without ever finding the winner's circle once. His original trainer, Ben Colebrook, had already tried him on dirt, on an artificial surface, and on turf, hunting for anywhere the horse could win, and nothing worked. In the fall of 2019, Colebrook made a decision that ends most horses' careers in obscurity. He sent Nix Go's final start of the season out onto the turf course at Churchill Downs, a surface the colt had never tried, essentially as a last resort. Nix Go finished the year exactly where he started it, winless, and was quietly transferred to a new trainer named Brad Cox for the coming season. Nobody wrote a headline about it. Trainer changes on struggling horses happen every week in this sport, and most of them change nothing at all. 2 years later, on November 6, 2021, that same gray horse crossed the finish line at Del Mar Racetrack in California to win the Breeders' Cup Classic, the single richest and most prestigious dirt race in North America, worth $6 million to the connections that day alone. He would retire with career earnings of $9,258,135, making him one of the richest racehorses in American history and only the second Maryland-bred horse ever to be voted American Horse of the Year, joining the legendary Cigar, who had done it twice back in 1995 and 1996. He had been bought as a yearling for $87,000 by a foreign government racing authority nobody in Kentucky took seriously, and the story of how a 10-race loser became a $9 million champion is not a story about a horse getting lucky. It is a story about an owner nobody respected, a trainer who was quietly having the best turnaround stretch of his career, and one specific physical problem inside the horse's own front leg that had been sabotaging him the entire time, hiding in plain sight the whole season. Everyone had written him off. Every part of that reversal happened inside 4 years, from an $87,000 sales ticket in September 2017 to a $9 million retirement in January 2022. And almost every single turn in the story traces back to one of 3 people: a breeder who claimed his own mother out of a cheap race, a foreign buyer everyone in Kentucky underestimated, and a trainer who spent 9 hard years learning exactly how to find what other trainers miss. Section 1. The Nix System. Nix Go was foaled on January 29, 2016, on a farm in Maryland. His breeder was a woman named Angie Moore, who ran a modest operation called Greenmount Farm. Moore had not paid a fortune for his bloodline either. His dam, a mare named Cosmo's Buddy, had been claimed by Moore's family for $40,000 back in 2009, meaning Moore had literally bought her out of a cheap claiming race rather than acquiring her through any prestigious sale. Cosmo's Buddy went on to become a multiple stakes winner herself for the Moore family's operation, which is exactly the kind of quiet, unglamorous success story that never makes headlines in an industry obsessed with 7-figure yearlings. His sire was a stallion named Painter, whose own story carried an eerie preview of what Nix Go would later go through. Painter had won the 2012 Haskell Invitational Stakes at Monmouth Park and finished second in both the Belmont Stakes and the Awesome Again Stakes, a race named for his own sire, but shortly after that Haskell win, Painter nearly died. He developed severe colic that required emergency surgery, and while recovering, he contracted laminitis in his hind legs, the same agonizing hoof condition that has ended other champions' lives entirely. Painter survived, against real odds, spending weeks in intensive veterinary care before he was well enough to travel home, but the ordeal ended his racing career early, after only 11 total starts, and left him standing at Windstar Farm in Kentucky for a modest stud fee of just $10,000, a fraction of what a Haskell winner in good health would normally command. Nix Go's own pedigree, in other words, ran directly through a sire who had already proven that a serious physical setback does not have to be the end of the story, a theme that would repeat itself one generation down the line in a knee joint instead of a set of hooves. In November 2016, Angie Moore sold the colt as a weanling at the Keeneland November mixed sale in Lexington, Kentucky, for $40,000 to a buyer called North Face Bloodstock. 10 months later, in September 2017, the colt went back through the Keeneland sales ring as a yearling, and this time, the buyer was the Korea Racing Authority, the single government body that controls all thoroughbred racing in South Korea. They paid $87,000. That sale price tells you almost everything about how the American racing establishment viewed this horse and this buyer. $87,000 is a modest sum in the Keeneland September sale, where elite yearlings by fashionable stallions regularly sell for $1 million or more, and where the Korea Racing Authority itself was operating under a real financial ceiling. Racing in South Korea is conducted entirely on dirt because of the country's frequent wet weather, and for years the Korean government had imposed price limits on how much money could be spent importing foreign bloodstock, meaning Korean buyers were structurally locked out of bidding wars for the sale's biggest names before the auctioneer even opened the bidding. Korean buyers at American sales were, in the industry's own eyes, shopping in the bargain bin, hunting for horses good enough to improve the breeding stock back home, not horses capable of beating America's best on America's biggest stages. There was one more detail about this particular purchase that revealed exactly what the Korea Racing Authority was actually doing. They named the colt Nix Go after their own internal breeding evaluation system, called K-Nix, where the K stood for Korea and the word Nix referred to a nicking theory, the idea that certain sire lines produce above-average results when crossed with certain other sire lines, regardless of how fashionable either individual bloodline happens to be on its own. Nicking theory is a real, if debated, tool inside the breeding industry, built by combing through decades of stallion and broodmare sire combinations and looking for statistical patterns of success that outperform what either line does on its own, essentially a spreadsheet-based approach to a business that has historically run on reputation and gut feeling. And in fact, the theory got a piece of validation almost immediately, because Nix Go's own specific sire and dam sire cross, Painter over an outflanker mare, produced a genuine graded stakes winner on its very first attempt, a 100% hit rate on a sample size of exactly one horse, which is a statistician's nightmare and a breeder's dream in the same sentence. In other words, the horse was not purchased because a scout fell in love with his gait or his pedigree page. He was purchased as a data point, a prospect selected by a formula, intended primarily to go home to Korea, eventually, and improve the quality of Korean-bred racehorses. Nobody at Keeneland in September 2017 believed they had just watched the future 2021 American Horse of the Year walk through the ring for $87,000. Section 2. The Flash and the Collapse. Nix Go made his first professional start in the summer of 2018 in a 5-furlong sprint at Ellis Park in Kentucky, and he won by 3.5 lengths, despite racing green and inexperienced, the kind of raw, unpolished speed that makes trainers dream about what a horse might become once he learns his job. It was an eye-catching debut for trainer Ben Colebrook, and the racing press took immediate notice. Colebrook then moved him up in class quickly, sending him to the historic grounds of Saratoga Racecourse in New York for the Grade 3 Sanford Stakes, one of the sport's oldest and most competitive races for young horses, where the ambitious placement backfired and Nix Go ran a distant 5th against much sharper company than he had faced at Ellis Park. He rebounded with a third-place finish in the Arlington, Washington Futurity, run on that track's artificial surface, and then, on October 6, 2018, back at Keeneland, he delivered the performance that made his name in American racing. Under jockey Albin Jimenez, at odds of 70-1, meaning almost nobody in the betting crowd gave him a real chance, Nix Go led the field from start to finish and won the Grade 1 Claiborne Breeders' Futurity by 5.5 lengths. It was trainer Ben Colebrook's first ever Grade 1 victory, a career milestone for a young conditioner still building his own reputation in the sport. Colebrook later told reporters it was a thrill, admitting that turning for home he genuinely thought they might get there, but that the horse he was chasing, a well-regarded colt named Game Winner, was simply the one to beat all along. Weeks later, Knicks Go traveled to the Breeders' Cup Juvenile at Churchill Downs and proved Colebrook's instinct correct. Running the race of his young life, surging past the pace setter, and battling that very same Game Winner all the way to the wire before finally yielding in defeat by a narrow margin. He had lost, but he had lost to a champion, and he had done it as a virtual unknown who had entered the year worth $87,000. At 2 years old, Knicks Go looked like a genuine Kentucky Derby contender for the following spring. Then, in his very next start, the Grade 2 Kentucky Jockey Club Stakes at Churchill Downs, Knicks Go finished 11th in a field of 14. It was a strange, sudden collapse in form with no obvious explanation, and it turned out to be the first sign of the entire following season. The Kentucky Jockey Club collapse stung precisely because of how it happened. Knicks Go did not simply get outrun by better horses. He finished 11th of 14, a beaten favorite falling apart in the stretch in a way that has more than one possible explanation in this sport. A young horse simply not handling the pressure of a big field, a training pattern that had asked too much too soon, or, as it would eventually turn out, something physically wrong that nobody in the barn had identified yet. In 2019, running on what was supposed to be the road to the Kentucky Derby, Knicks Go could not win a single race in 8 attempts. He ran 5th in the Sam F. Davis Stakes at Tampa Bay Downs, 7th in the Gotham Stakes, 4th in the Lexington Stakes, 5th in the Matt Winn Stakes, and 2nd in the Ellis Park Derby. Trainer Ben Colebrook tried him on turf for his final start of the season, and Knicks Go lost that too. The colt had gone from a 70-1 shot who nearly upset a champion at the Breeders' Cup to a horse who could not win against much softer competition, and nobody in his own barn could fully explain why. At the end of 2019, Knicks Go was quietly moved from Ben Colebrook's stable to the barn of Brad Cox, a change that on the surface looked like nothing more than a struggling owner shuffling horses between trainers, hoping a change of scenery might help. What almost nobody outside the barn understood at the time was that this particular trainer swap was about to intersect with the best stretch of Brad Cox's career, and with a physical problem in Knicks Go's own body that had been quietly limiting him the entire time. Section 3. Brad Cox's Climb. To understand why the Knicks Go transfer mattered, you have to understand who Brad Cox was in 2019. Cox was not yet a household name in American racing. In 2005, his first full year as a licensed trainer, Cox worked with a small string of horses through the Midwest racing circuit, grinding through long, exhausting days for modest returns, the kind of unglamorous grind that thousands of trainers put in every year without ever breaking through. Across his first 4 full seasons as a trainer, from 2005 through 2008, Cox recorded only 51 total wins, and in only one of those years did his horses earn more than $290,000 combined, a figure that barely covers the operating costs of a small stable, let alone builds a reputation. Cox spent 9 years working before he won his first Grade 3 stakes race in 2014. The following year, 2015, he captured his first Grade 2 stakes. Then, in 2018, everything accelerated at once. A filly named Monomoy Girl gave Brad Cox his first Grade 1 victory, and from that point forward, Cox's stable exploded into one of the most successful operations in American racing, adding graded stakes wins at a pace almost nobody else in the sport could match. By 2020, the same year Knicks Go arrived in his barn, Cox was being honored with the Eclipse Award as the sport's outstanding trainer, an honor voted on by the National Thoroughbred Racing Association, Equibase officials, the Daily Racing Form, and the National Turf Writers and Broadcasters, and he was favored to repeat the following year as well. So Knicks Go did not simply switch barns in 2019. He landed inside a training operation that was, at that exact moment, transforming from a hard-working regional outfit into one of the most dominant stables in the country. run by a man who had spent 9 unglamorous years learning exactly how to find what was wrong with a horse other trainers had given up on. And Cox brought something specific to Nick's Go that his previous barn had not fully identified. The horse needed surgery. Section 4. The Bone Chip. Nick's Go's first race for Brad Cox came in February 2020, an optional claiming allowance race at Oaklawn Park in Arkansas. He won by 7.5 lengths, an emphatic debut for his new trainer that immediately suggested the horse might simply have needed a change of scenery after all. But shortly after that win, Cox and his veterinary team discovered the physical issue that had likely been quietly sabotaging Nick's Go's entire 3-year-old season: a bone chip. A bone chip is a small fragment of bone that breaks loose inside a joint, usually the knee or ankle, and lodges itself in a way that causes inflammation, discomfort, and inconsistent performance, without necessarily producing any obvious outward lameness a trainer could easily spot from the rail. A horse racing with a bone chip can look completely sound standing in the paddock and still be running through real pain at speed, explaining exactly the kind of unpredictable form collapse Nick's Go had shown all through 2019, when a horse who had nearly upset a Breeders' Cup champion suddenly could not beat allowance company. The surgery itself was not exotic by the standards of the sport, but the diagnosis was the hard part. Removing a bone chip usually means a veterinary surgeon goes into the joint with an arthroscope, a small camera on a thin instrument, locates the loose fragment, and extracts it through a tiny incision, a routine procedure performed on racehorses every week at major training centers across the country. What made Nick's Go's case notable was not the surgery, it was that an entire previous training operation had run him through 8 consecutive losing races without ever pinpointing that specific joint as the source of the problem. Cox's team found it within his first few months with the horse. Nick's Go underwent surgery to remove the bone chip and was sidelined from racing for nearly 4 months. He returned to the workout tab in mid-July of 2020, and when he finally came back to the races, the transformation was immediate and dramatic. In October of 2020, at Keeneland, Nick's Go demolished a field in a 1 1/16 mile optional claiming race by 10 1/4 lengths, running in the front-running, wire-to-wire style that would come to define the rest of his career, the same aggressive, seize-the-lead-and-never-look-back running style he had shown flashes of as a 2-year-old, before the injury started masking it. Just over a month after that Keeneland demolition, on November 7, 2020, Nick's Go went off as the 9-5 favorite in the Grade 1 Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile at Keeneland, ridden by jockey Joel Rosario. Rosario later told reporters it looked like the horse was going easy, and that he genuinely did not realize how fast his own splits were until he checked the clock afterward. Nick's Go won it in track record time, giving trainer Brad Cox his 6th career Breeders' Cup victory, and his 3rd of that particular Breeders' Cup weekend alone, following wins earlier that same 2-day meet with Aunt Pearl in the juvenile fillies turf, and with Essential Quality in the juvenile. The horse, who had gone winless in 8 consecutive starts 1 year earlier, had just set a track record in a Grade 1 race worth over $1 million, pushing his career earnings past the $1 million mark for the first time. The bone chip, quietly removed, had been the difference the whole time. Section 5. Horse of the Year. Nick's Go opened his 2021 campaign exactly where 2020 had left off. On January 23, 2021, he won the Grade 1 Pegasus World Cup Invitational Stakes at Gulfstream Park in Florida, running the 1 1/8 mile distance in 1 minute, 47 89 seconds, in the same dominant, gate-to-wire style, once again as the betting favorite in a race built around America's best older dirt horses. It was his 4th Grade 1 victory, and it seemed to confirm that Nick's Go had fully arrived as one of the best dirt horses in America, a far cry from the anonymous 3-year-old who could not win a single race 2 years earlier. Then, in February 2021, Nick's Go traveled overseas for the $20 million Saudi Cup at King Abdulaziz Racetrack in Riyadh, then the single richest horse race in the entire world, and his winning streak came to an abrupt halt when he was outrun for the early lead by a horse named Charlatan and fated to finish a well-beaten fourth, his front-running style neutralized for the first time all year by a rival with more early speed than he had ever faced. It was a long, disorienting trip for any horse, a journey across 10 time zones into an unfamiliar climate and an unfamiliar surface, run against a genuinely deep international field, assembled specifically to test the best dirt horses money could fly in, and the defeat did real, if temporary, damage to his reputation as the undisputed best older horse in America. Back in the United States that June, running as the odds-on favorite in the Grade 1 Hill and Dale Metropolitan Handicap at Belmont Park, a race with a long history of testing genuine milers, Knicks Go set the pace as usual, but again faded in the stretch, and again finished fourth. His second consecutive defeat against domestic company that had, on paper, looked beatable. For a moment, after 2 defeats in a row against tough international and domestic fields, it looked as though the grinding front-running style and the long-distance travel might finally be catching up to a horse who had already carried an enormous workload for a single racing season. Knicks Go answered those 2 defeats emphatically. On July 2, 2021, he returned with an explosive 10 1/4 length win in the Grade 3 Prairie Meadows Cornhusker Handicap in Iowa, a dominant front-running effort that suggested the Saudi Cup and Metropolitan Handicap defeats had been about pace and traffic more than any real decline in his ability. He followed that in October with a 4-length win in the Grade 3 Lucas Classic Stakes at Churchill Downs, a race named for the very trainer D. Wayne Lucas, who had first turned Ben Colebrook into a horseman, tightening his final preparation for the biggest test of his career. But it was in between those 2 races, on August 7, 2021, at Saratoga Racecourse in New York, that Knicks Go delivered one of the defining performances of his career in the historic Whitney Stakes. Facing a compact but genuinely elite field that included the accomplished, previously unbeaten in 8 Maxfield and the 2020 Preakness Stakes winner Swiss Skydiver, Knicks Go went straight to the front under Joel Rosario and simply never gave anyone else a chance, opening a big lead down the backstretch, shrugging off a late run from Swiss Skydiver, and drawing off to win by 4.5 lengths, handing Maxfield only the second defeat of his entire 9-race career. Knicks Go earned a Beyer speed figure of 111 for the performance, one of the fastest figures recorded by any horse that entire year, running the 9-furlong distance in 1 minute, 47 70 seconds. The Whitney win also punched his ticket directly into the Breeders' Cup Classic as a win-and-you're-in qualifier, and by season's end, Knicks Go had strung together 8 career triple-digit Beyer figures, a mark of genuine, sustained elite speed rather than a single lucky afternoon. That set up the biggest afternoon of his career. On November 6, 2021, at Del Mar Racetrack in California, Knicks Go lined up in the Breeders' Cup Classic against a field that included the reigning and controversial Kentucky Derby winner Medina Spirit, the Belmont Stakes and Travers Stakes winner Essential Quality, who was also trained by Brad Cox and had actually gone off as the marginal betting favorite that day, and the popular Californian closer Hot Rod Charlie, whose fans chanted, "Let's go Chuck," before the race. Bettors widely expected a speed duel to develop between Medina Spirit and Knicks Go, since both horses favored front-running styles, and Knicks Go himself was sent off at odds of 3-1. Instead, Medina Spirit broke slowly and drifted 3 or 4 wide around the clubhouse turn, and Joel Rosario sent Knicks Go straight to an uncontested lead. He ran an opening quarter mile in 23 1600 seconds, a half mile in 45 7700 seconds, 6 furlongs in 1 minute, 10 400 seconds, and a full mile in 1 minute, 35 2800 seconds, numbers that would normally belong to a sprint race, not the opening fractions of a 1.25 mile classic distance he had never even attempted before that day. Coming around the far turn, Hot Rod Charlie mounted a serious challenge and closed to within a single length at the top of the stretch, briefly threatening to spoil the coronation. Knicks Go answered instantly, drawing away again through the final furlong, to win by 2 3/4 lengths over Medina Spirit, with his own stablemate Essential Quality closing for third, 3/4 of a length back, and Hot Rod Charlie settling for fourth. His final time was 1 minute 59 and 57 seconds. Trainer Brad Cox called him, simply, a tremendous horse, a champion now, and it was Cox's first ever victory in the Classic itself, despite already owning 6 other Breeders' Cup wins. Knicks Go became just the 6th horse in Breeders' Cup history to win 2 different Breeders' Cup races, having already taken the Dirt Mile the year before, and jockey Joel Rosario notched his 48th graded stakes win of the season in the process, closing in on the modern single-season record. On February 10, 2022, at the Eclipse Awards ceremony, Knicks Go was voted American Horse of the Year, receiving 228 of the total votes cast, an overwhelming margin over every other contender, with the runner-up receiving only 2 votes. He closed out the 2021 season with a career record of 24 starts, 10 wins, 3 second-place finishes, and 1 third, and total earnings past $8,670,000. Section 6. The Jockey Who Never Let Go. There is one more name that ran through nearly every major win of Knicks Go's turnaround, and his own path to that stretch carries an echo of the horse he was riding. Joel Rosario had been aboard for the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile in November 2020, for the Pegasus World Cup in January 2021, for the Whitney Stakes in August, and for the Breeders' Cup Classic in November, meaning the same rider was in the irons for essentially the entire championship arc, from a horse still finding his feet after knee surgery to a unanimous Horse of the Year. Rosario was already an established name in American racing by the time he first sat on Knicks Go, a Dominican-born jockey who had won riding titles at major American circuits and had already piloted horses to victory in the Kentucky Derby and the Breeders' Cup Classic before this partnership began. But what mattered specifically for Knicks Go was Rosario's feel for a front-running horse, the patience to let a natural pace-setter like Knicks Go relax into his own rhythm rather than fighting him for position, and the judgment to know exactly when to ask for more. In the 2021 Breeders' Cup Classic, Rosario's decision to let Knicks Go roll along on an uncontested, blistering pace rather than restrain him was precisely the read that turned a promising favorite into a coronation. By the end of that season, Rosario had posted 48 graded stakes wins, closing in on the modern single-season record set by the Hall of Fame rider Jerry Bailey, and Knicks Go's classic victory sat near the top of that entire tally. The partnership captures something the whole Knicks Go story keeps returning to. Excellence in this sport rarely announces itself cleanly. It shows up in a jockey's willingness to trust a horse's natural instincts instead of overriding them, the same way it showed up in a trainer's willingness to keep looking for a physical explanation, instead of accepting a bad running line as the whole truth. Nobody wrote headlines about Rosario's patience the way they eventually wrote them about Knicks Go's speed, but the horse does not win the classic front-running, and uncontested if his rider fights him for the lead, instead of letting him find it himself. Section 7. The Final Race. Knicks Go's connections had one piece of unfinished business before retirement, a rematch at the Pegasus World Cup, the same race that had opened his championship season the year before, with a chance to become the first horse in the race's history to win it twice, and to push his career earnings past $10 million in the process. On January 29, 2022, at Gulfstream Park, Knicks Go lined up as the 6-5 favorite against a rising 4-year-old named Life is Good, trained by the Hall of Fame conditioner Todd Pletcher, who was fresh off his own 5 3/4 length win in the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile. The two heavy favorites were installed at such short odds that the exacta wager paying both horses in order returned only $4.80 on a $2 bet, a sign of just how thoroughly the betting public expected these two specific horses to finish 1 and 2. It did not go the way the storybook version demanded. Life is Good broke sharply from the gate under jockey Irad Ortiz Jr. and opened up a 5-length lead within the first quarter mile, a lead he never surrendered. Knicks Go, breaking from the rail post position, settled into third early behind a long shot named Stiletto Boy, fought his way up to second, and battled gamely the rest of the way, but he never seriously threatened the leader, going down by 3¼ lengths in what Pletcher afterward called simply a tremendous effort from his own horse. Trainer Brad Cox told reporters afterward that Life is Good had simply been the better horse that day, and that there was no shame in finishing second to a performance like that, adding that Life is Good was a lot better horse than them on the afternoon, and that they were second best, full stop. It was, in Cox's own words, a bittersweet ending. Knicks Go closed his racing career with a final record of 25 starts, 10 wins, 4 second-place finishes, and 1 third-place finish, and total earnings of $9,258,135, just short of the $10 million milestone that a Pegasus repeat would have delivered. He retired to stand at stud at Tailor-Made Farm in Kentucky in 2022, standing for an advertised fee of $30,000 in his first season, a staggering rise for a horse who had sold as a yearling for $87,000 just 5 years earlier, and who carried 8 career triple-digit buyer figures and 2 Breeders' Cup trophies into the breeding shed. Section 8. The Full Circle. Knicks Go's stud career quickly proved he had inherited more than just speed. His very first crop of runners included a colt named Ewing, who won the Grade 2 Saratoga Special Stakes at Saratoga, the same historic track where Knicks Go himself had once run a distant 5th as an unproven 2-year-old back in 2018, and a filly named La Culasse, who ran 3rd in the Grade 1 Natalma Stakes at Woodbine in Canada. By October 2025, Knicks Go ranked 4th on the entire freshman sire list in North America, with his first crop of runners collectively earning over $931,000 and 16 individual winners already on the board from just 53 total starters, a strike rate that immediately caught the attention of American breeders looking for the next hot young stallion prospect. Trainer Brad Cox, who had found the bone chip that unlocked the horse's racing career in the first place, told reporters he considered himself Knicks Go's #1 fan and planned to personally buy and race some of his weanlings and yearlings himself, a trainer betting his own money on the horse whose career he had helped rebuild from nothing. And then, in May 2026, the story came all the way back to where it began. The Korea Racing Authority, the same government body that had purchased Knicks Go for $87,000 as a bargain bin yearling back in 2017, announced that Knicks Go would relocate to South Korea to continue his stallion career there as part of a formal initiative called the Overseas Bloodstock Development Program, an effort specifically designed to identify promising American stallion prospects early and bring them home to raise the quality of Korean-bred racehorses. In its own public statement, the Korea Racing Authority called Knicks Go a symbol of the shared excellence between American breeders and Korean racing, and thanked the American breeders and farm staff who had trusted him with their mares over his 4 seasons at Tailor-Made, while acknowledging that the move would disappoint breeders who had hoped to continue sending mares to him inside the United States. Knicks Go remains listed on the official Blood Horse Stallion Register for the current breeding season, ensuring he stays visible in the global market even as he crosses the Pacific. Read that mission statement again and notice what it actually says. That was the exact same goal the Korea Racing Authority had stated when they bought an $87,000 yearling out of the Keeneland September sale back in 2017, find a promising prospect early, and use him to strengthen Korean bloodlines. Nobody in Kentucky believed that yearling would ever become a serious Grade 1 horse, let alone a $9 million horse of the year. He did both, then went home to Kentucky to sire American Grade 2 winners, and now, in 2026, he is finally completing the very assignment he was purchased for in the first place, just 9 years and 1 legendary career later than anybody could have possibly expected. Set Knicks Go's numbers next to the 2 horses who beat him in his 2 most painful defeats, and the pattern gets even sharper. Life is Good, the horse who denied him a storybook finish at the 2022 Pegasus, was a son of the fashionable sire Into Mischief, campaigned by the well-resourced Windstar Farm and CHC Incorporated, precisely the kind of connections the sales ring rewards before a horse has proven anything at all. Charlatan, who beat him in the Saudi Cup, carried a similarly blue-chip pedigree and a similarly well-funded operation behind him. Go beat plenty of horses with better paper credentials than his own throughout his career, and the 2 times he lost to horses who beat him on raw talent, both of those horses also happened to be exactly the kind of expensively bred, well-connected prospects that the American bloodstock market had been trained to prefer over a formula pick from a foreign racing authority. The market's favorites occasionally do turn out to be the best horses. They were simply never guaranteed to be, and for most of Go's own career, they were not. The lesson sitting underneath every part of this story is a stubbornly simple one. A 10-race losing streak was never proof that Go lacked talent. It was proof that a small bone fragment inside one knee joint can turn a genuine champion into a horse nobody wants, and that removing it can turn that same horse into one of the winningest earners in the history of American racing. Angie Moore bred him in Maryland for a modest fee, out of a mare her own family had claimed for $40,000. The Career Racing Authority bought him as a formula, not a hunch, gambling that a nicking theory computer model would outperform the fashionable pedigrees everyone else in the sales ring was chasing. Ben Colebrook could not fix him, despite trying every surface the sport offers. Brad Cox, 9 hard years into his own career, found the actual problem inside him. And Go answered every single question anybody ever asked about him, the only way a racehorse ever really can, by running straight to the front and daring the rest of the field to catch him. If you want to see another horse who proved every expert in the sales ring wrong, the John Henry video is on your screen right now. Thanks for watching.